It's season 7 of Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Rogue Tulips Consulting. We hit the 300 episode milestone this year, so don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We have a lot more to talk about. This episode is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of associations, CVBs, and hotels. Learn more about USAE News at usaenews.com. We're wrapping up the last episode of Season 7 with a first-time guest. It's Cyndee Woolley. She's here from C2 Communications. She's a communication executive and expert in PR and branding. We're talking crisis communications. It's December 15, 2025. Welcome to episode 311. Hey, everybody. It's Monday, December 15th, 2025, and this is our last episode of Season 7. But take heart, we will be back in early January with Season 8. This is episode 311 already. It's been quite a ride. Achieving our 300th episode this year was a real milestone, and we are not done talking. There is so many more conversations to have out there, and this is a great one to wrap up the year with. Here at Radio Free 501c, brought to you by my company, Rogue Tulips Consulting, and I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips, and I want to thank you for joining us this week. If you haven't followed or subscribed yet on your favorite service, please take a moment and do that, because like I said, we're going to be back in Season 8 with more conversations, lots of great information and insights, so you don't want to miss any of those. This week is a great topic to end the year on, especially as we're going into the rest of the holiday season and maybe dealing with our family members around the dinner table. But seriously, our topic is crisis communications and what that means and what constitutes a crisis for any organization. So my guest is Cyndee Woolley, and she is also a first-time guest, which is a great way to wind up a year full of first-time guests on our podcast. So Cyndee, welcome to Radio Free 501c. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Cyndee Woolley. I'm the owner of C2 Communications LLC. And our company has found a real niche in helping governments and corporations reach into the community and do community education through nonprofit work. And I gotta say, it's just so rewarding to be able to help share the messages and help move and build communities along the way. But sometimes there's some bumps in the road. So we've developed a real repertoire with crisis communications. And so I'm happy to share some of that with you. We hope that everyone is able to deck the halls safely and enjoy the holiday season. And, travel is perfect, but, there might be a hiccup and maybe there's a lesson to be learned today.
Oh, thanks, Cyndee. That is a great intro into crisis communications, because we are not perfect beings, nor do we live in a perfect world. So you never know when a crisis might pop up all of a sudden. And when you and I were getting ready for this episode, I mentioned to you that I kind of look at it as a crisis as anything that can affect the reputation of an organization. So what is your definition of crisis communications, or what a crisis is? And how do you approach it?
I think anytime I talk crisis communication, planning, or strategy with people who haven't been through a crisis, the first thing they go to is, that really doesn't happen to me. In this world of, terrorism and grand hurricanes and terrible school shootings, people think that crisis means the worst of the worst of whatever could happen to their business. And that's clearly not going to happen, right? But what they don't think about is that if an officer of the company gets a DUI, if someone from your company is caught shoplifting, if you go viral and you're not planning to go viral, something that could be really good could shut down all of your communications for you. So, crisis communications is really planning for the unplanned so that you can respond in and maintain operations without having to react and repair and put out fires. You know, if you've got that crisis plan together, then you just go through the steps and then you debrief at the end, and hopefully you've mitigated any of the damages that could happen.
I think that's an interesting perspective that you can be proactive about a crisis since it's something that's unexpected.
You know, it's a matter of taking it seriously. And as an entrepreneur, you know, like we can get stuck in the day to day of I have to manage this project, I have to manage this project, I have to serve this client, serve this next client. But you really have to take some time strategically, and it comes to brainstorming what could happen. What's throwing a big whiteboard on the wall and asking yourself, asking your team members, asking your clients, like, what would happen if a hurricane went through Asheville, North Carolina? No one planned for that, right?
Right.
So that was devastating. What would happen if if you did go viral? So I mentioned that in passing. One of the reasons I was hired by Shy Wolf Sanctuary Education Center was because of Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones went crazy on the internet, and so many fans were following it. They developed an obsession with dire wolves. And a little grassroots nonprofit organization just dedicated to rescuing wolf dogs and helping make sure that they lived out their lives healthy and happy and loved. Just in an instant, one of their wolf dogs went viral, and and it shut down their website. You know, they were
Right.
just flooded with traffic, shut down the website. They had to do massive repairs. And then, of course, media started calling for years after that. And this particular wolf dog that went viral, actually, it's probably still making its rounds.
That's so interesting. And I know Game of Thrones fans are really loyal fans and very into it, probably giving the Trekkies a lot of competition with their story. You also had mentioned your most unusual crisis communication situation, also related to the Wolf Dog Sanctuary.
Yeah, definitely. You know, anytime you're handling animals or children on TV, right? Like there's always this risk of unknown. But within a nonprofit organization, if you're handling rescues, you're handling animals that are not necessarily in the greatest condition, or they're in a period of crisis themselves where they're being surrendered for better care. And so one night I got the call from the executive director, and she said, I need your help right now. We've had a wolf dog escape. And this is several years ago. So Eve, Eva was her name, and the wolf dog was being temporarily housed there. She was being surrendered. And this wolf dog was just in crisis mode. And she scaled a 9-foot fence.
Wow.
She climbed out. And of course, the sanctuary had protocols in place to, you know, capture her and to get out in the community and track her and everything. But we needed to manage the media. And so we were giving our periodic updates. We were alerting people. We were making sure that next door knew that, you know, people in the immediate vicinity, if they saw her, to just stay away because she's spooked. And that night, everything fortunately ended peacefully. And it went a lot better because we didn't have to figure out how to communicate. There was a very clear chain of command, and the executive director gave me updates. I shared them on social media. We, you know, pushed it out in press release, and we touched base, we got updates, and the animal was rescued safely. There were no incidents with the surrounding neighborhood, and it went flawlessly. But that's because we had a plan in place.
Well, and that is the point I think that we should emphasize here is you already were prepared. You looked ahead, you thought strategically what could happen, how could it happen, and then what would we do and who will be the main spokesperson. And hopefully that wolf dog was either adopted into a family that could take care of her or got to live and is still living there, hopefully in a healthy way. Because a lot of it sounds to me like a crisis like this is that you have to make sure the people in the community are not afraid, but use caution.
That's a really you're opening the door to an interesting topic, right? When there's no information, right? When the community surrounds you doesn't know what's happening and they get startled, they're going to make up a scenario. And they're going
Yes.
to make up the worst case scenario
Yes.
because we're human beings and we go off of fear and anxiety and, oh my gosh, what if? And how is this going to impact me? And, we make up so much information. So a big part of crisis communications is how do you get information out to the impacted people, because you want to fill that space. You want to give them the facts that they can take action on instead of allowing them to make up stuff. Because whatever they make up, it's not going to be right.
That's right. Because it is so true in any situation. If people don't know what's going on, nature abhors a vacuum, as the saying goes. So people fill it in with details and stories. And I heard this, or so and so said they saw this. And next thing you know, a lost, panicked wolf dog is suddenly, the Sasquatch or Momo the monster or somebody like that. So it seems to me, though, that a lot of organizations probably don't think that way. They don't think like you, Cyndee. They don't say, let's be strategic. Let's look ahead as to what could happen. And if it does, what are we going to do and who will be that person? So, for those organizations that do not have a crisis communication plan, which is different from your regular communication plan, what's a good way for them to get started?
Absolutely. I think that the starting point is to form a group, right? And form a group of your key spokespeople, but also get people who are on the front line so that you can get feedback from those who see the organization in a different way, and get them and start preparing, like brainstorming. What could go wrong? If what could go wrong if the volunteer didn't show up that day? What could go wrong if an executive director needed to be replaced? What could go wrong if we failed and someone was injured, right? Just spitball, just put all the scenarios up, and then get some anxiety medication because everyone's going to be
That's right.
very stressed out. But once
We need chocolate at that meeting.
maybe a bottle of wine, so have this meeting and keep it very informal, but start mapping out what the solutions would be. Start grouping, where you can take that next step. You need to identify who's going to be your primary spokesperson. You need to make sure everyone else knows to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah, a very important point.
Very important point. And then, you need a plan for how are you going to disseminate the information as it goes forward, right? And who's going to collaborate with any other partners. In certain situations, in the incident I talked about with the wolf dog, escaping, we notified the media. I believe we also notified first responders. But that wasn't my responsibility. That fell to the executive director. And the reason we notified them is because if someone spots a wolf dog or it gets startled, who are they going to call? 911, right?
That's right.
So if we alert them, we're out, we're searching for this. Number one, they can support, and number two, if there's a sighting, they're not just going to go in and go in unprepared. They're going to call you and brief you on the situation and collaborate and work together more effectively, right? And so it's not just about recognizing that you as a nonprofit or as an organization need to have, the silo of communication within your organization. It's who do you need to notify? Who do you need to work with outside that? I'm going to throw another example out there. I was contracted by the Collier County Mosquito Control District, and being from Florida, I thought this was something that you had everywhere, right? Like, of course, everyone's got planes that fly and and try to control mosquitoes because they're really annoying, but that's not right. So, in the unique area that Collier County is located, it's right by the Everglades. Lots and lots of mosquitoes, and to prevent disease spread, there's a mosquito control district.
Mhm.
I think it was. I can't remember if it was 2012 or 2015. It was right in that range. We had something called Zika virus, an outbreak that started closer to Miami, and then of course with the proliferation of our mosquitoes spread into our district, and it was a statewide nightmare. Collier County Mosquito Control was at the front end of that because they're, number one, no one knew what they were doing. Number two, everyone said the control spray that you're utilizing, we don't know what it is. Is it toxic? Is it causing this? Is it contributing? Right? And number three, there were extra patrols and surveillance of mosquitoes around areas where the Zika virus had been identified, right? Someone had been diagnosed with it, so they were extra monitoring around that house. So with the mosquito control district, 50 years completely flew under the radar, right? And it was a situation where they they didn't need to put information out, so they kept things quiet. The less people knew, the better, in previous leadership's mind. Well, that vacuum, right? That vacuum got filled very quickly with environmentalists, attacking the organization. And so the first thing we did was open up the doors and invite in our county commissioners, invite in state officials, invite in public health officials, the media. We opened up the door and said, look at what we're doing. This is what the plan is. This is the science. This is how we're controlling the measures. And that, fortunately, we were able to mitigate some of that. So that year was very crazy, very stressful. But after that response, a public relations department was brought in, crisis communication plan honed and developed, and proactive community outreach was a big priority. And, that mitigated all the problems.
So just being ready, being prepared, actually telling people what's going on, like you said earlier, that really makes a big difference. That's a great example, though, because people start fear mongering or seeing that vacuum as an opportunity to promote their own agenda, whatever that may be. So that's an excellent example of why you need to have a crisis communications plan and then maybe bring in full-time people. You had mentioned earlier as an example of when you need to change your chief staff executive or executive director. What are some of the communication pitfalls people may come upon because they are having to change their top leader for whatever reason that may be?
There are so many reasons that a board may decide, that it's time for a new vision, new growth, new direction for an organization. And, while while they know the inner workings and they know, that leadership has a path, right?
Mhm.
Externally, you have key stakeholders that may be shaken by the change, right? So you might have staff members that are upset by a change because they're very attached to one leader and not the other. You may have donors who are very attached to the one, and if you've got an abrupt change, they may pull funding or resources. You've got your participants and the clients that you serve. That disruption can really impact them as well, right? So it's important that it be rolled out in an effective way. And I've been a part of a few, changing of the guards, right? And sometimes it wasn't the right fit. And really, it was a matter of everyone being, on the same page as far as messaging and working towards the best fit for the organization, the best advancing their goals. The organization comes first. The organization itself is bigger than any one person. So if you can create the message, you can help people leave with dignity, and you can make it a win-win situation. You can preserve the relationships and mitigate any of that negative response and backlash that might come.
And would you say that it's a good idea to have some of those conversations before it goes public so that they're prepared, they're not taken by surprise?
Absolutely. I think if the board is having conversations about a replacement, it needs to be kept very tight within the board, confidence, and then make a plan and a strategy before you actually make that a public announcement. And that's not always something that you can lay out in a flow chart of this is how we're going to do it, because different leaders have different impacts that you'll need to mitigate. But I definitely encourage you, if you are a board member listening to this, contact your PR person and contact the person for the organization, and in truth, their contract is with the organization, and their duty is to protect the organization, not just the individual. Obviously, we have friends that we work with and we develop relationships, but when it comes to professionalism, you want to make sure that the organization stays intact, and continues to serve the populations that are in need.
Well, that's great advice, especially near the end of the year when people are starting to change jobs or boards are thinking differently, or maybe you have a new board, boards change, and so they may want to go a different direction. So that's great advice. But I think the tougher issue is when something bursts into the public and it seems to get its own momentum and it's difficult to respond to those things. And an example I'm specifically thinking of is what happened at the American Institute of Architects about a year or so ago. There was a perception among the membership that wrongdoing was going on in the C suite
Mm-hmm.
and with the board of directors. And it got very nasty very fast and it got very public. And the chief staff executive at that time eventually had to move on to another organization. She was able to get another position, but she had to leave because there was so much negativity that was generated. So, is there anything you can do to get your arms around a situation like that that seems to have a life of its own? It just keeps growing, and more people are commenting, and it's getting into the press, like in Bloomberg. That to me was just a really awful situation because how do you stop it? How do you respond? How do you mitigate something like that?
I think the ounce of prevention is worth the pound of cure in these kinds of situations. So, starting with a culture of transparency, a culture with ethics at the core, that they are everyone's united and serving in the same direction. And I think that part of a proactive strategic communications plan has releases of these are our goals. These are we've reaching milestones. This is how we're reaching out to the community. Those strategic comms plans can really help you prevent a blow up like that because everyone knows what you're doing, and because your team is aligned and moving in the same way. That's not going to stop every crisis. That's not I it might not have stopped this particular instance. And at that point, really, there's a spot where the person who is taking the worst of it is going to have to resign and apologize, seek legal counsel, and find the best path to move forward. I say seek legal counsel because we never know the implications, right? We never know the implications of the letters, and certainly you can't go out and apologize as soon as something breaks, but there should be legal counsel, and there should be separate legal counsel for your executive director and for your board so that, everyone's interests are covered. But, and in a bit of irony, public relations people often hate, attorneys who say, you can't say that, right? Like there's a strategy back and forth, but, legally, we don't want to put out the information that could get you in worse trouble.
Right.
But I'm reminded of a call I got one time where someone literally told me, my wife and I got drunk, we fought, and it turned into a bad fight, and now there's domestic violence charges. He goes,
Oh my gosh.
Can you help me? Can you help me with this? And I said, no. I don't represent that, but what I can tell you is draft your resignation letter, apologize, go to marriage counseling, stop drinking, right? Like at the end of the day, it comes down to something so basic as say you're sorry, get some counseling, stop drinking,
Yes.
and you're never going to continue in this career on this position.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we have to accept that there's consequences to our actions and our behaviors and our public activity. And sometimes there's no coming back from something like that. And that is the only thing you can do. I've seen a couple of things earlier this fall about women in public positions deciding to do their toilet duty outside because they had been drinking. Like one woman was a judge and like went to the bathroom in a bush. And the police were trying to help her, stop her, get her home, and turn it into a thing. And another woman who was assistant district attorney, I believe it was New Jersey, but don't quote me on that. But she was out having fun with one of her friends. They got kind of drunk and they got rowdy. And so a restaurant called the police, and the police were like, could you just please leave? And instead of just saying, okay, sorry, we'll leave, she started screaming, do you know who I am? Do you? And he's like, yes, I do, but you still have to leave. And so she and her friend ended up getting arrested, and then she got put on administrative leave, which I think most of us know is step one toward separation from your position in many instances, not necessarily this one. But that's why in a world of video, we really do have to be careful. People will film something. They won't get involved, but they'll watch it and they'll film it and they'll put it on their social media channels and say, look at this thing I saw. So we really do have to be cautious about that. And I agree with you. Just sometimes we just have to stop drinking, resign, apologize, and find a new career path later on. Because, there's obviously some things that are too public that you cannot fix, that you can't do anything about. But I think you had mentioned transparency earlier, and I think that's really a lot of what drives some PR issues, especially for an organization of any kind, not just a nonprofit, but I think for profits. I think we all remember the tech company employees who were married to other people and got caught on the kiss cam. And then
Whoopsie.
yes, and they instead of just like waving and sitting down, they tried to hide. It's like you should have just waved and there you go. But then that all got very public and resolved in public. And the company actually turned it to its advantage and used the notoriety to elevate awareness of their company in the marketplace. So at least somebody got something out of it. So we do
Hmm.
need to be aware of that because the AIA example is a prime example of why transparency is important because there was no wrongdoing. There wasn't anything wrong or bad going on, but that perception of it because nobody was talking. And then it was, in my opinion, not handled very well once it did start to go public. So there was a lot of things like that. Some people thought there were unethical things going on at the organ.
Ethics, Cecilia, that's the whole nother conversation, the ethical conversation. I loved that podcast yeah, on when you came on my show last month. People take ethics for granted and getting, you know, so many of these situations could be really mitigated if you really look at the ethical policy and the ethical impact, and have open discussions about how is this impacting other people. So I'm interrupting you to toot your horn and say, anyone who's listening today needs to visit Cecilia's website and sign up for her ethics course so that they can really refresh that and make that a part of the annual training.
Oh, thanks, Cyndee. I really appreciate that. And it was really fun being a guest on your podcast. I don't often get to be a guest, so it was really fun for me. And I thought we had a really great conversation. So where can people find your podcasts in case they want to check it out?
Absolutely. I think my podcast, Cutting Through the Clutter, is available on Apple. It's available on Spotify. We have links to it. We put our show notes and everything on the website. So you can always visit c2-com.com and you'll get links to both Apple and Spotify. So you can find those there.
Oh, excellent. And I think a lot of bring it back to the topic of ethics, a lot of ethics is transparency because you want people to know why you're doing what you're doing, not that you're doing something. And so, for a leader of any organization, but especially a nonprofit organization, conveying that part of the message to the world around you is key to success because you know why you're doing it and you know you're doing the right thing. And maybe you talk to the board and they said, yes, we approve it, but you really got to make sure people around you understand it from the staff to the general membership to the other volunteer leaders because they're the people who start filling in the blanks. As we said earlier, nature abhors a vacuum. If you don't tell people, they're going to make something up. They're going to say, well, I heard this, or I heard that, or I bet it's this. And you don't want that. It's unnecessary. It causes a lot of stress for everybody. It's just as easy to tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it as it is to just do it. So adding
I
that little extra step, I think, is a good idea.
I think, yeah, when people really understand the why, they'll know that, yeah, maybe this isn't the route they would have chosen, but they'll understand the influences that they didn't have beforehand, right? And that happens so much in politics too, right? You see politics in the news, and it goes in multiple directions, but when you're behind the scenes and you're talking to the candidates and you're talking to the government officials, and you realize how many people have been taken into consideration, the finances, the inputs that are coming from multiple angles. It takes your crystal clear opinion of what you see in the 2-minute news shot, and it really muddies the water, makes you understand why they went the way they went.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because boy, politics in any era can be incredibly contentious when people don't actually listen to each other and understand where you don't have to agree, but
Hmm.
you can try to understand.
Hmm.
And that's why we need good policy. I think we need, this is my opinion, save the angry postcards and please don't bother Cyndee. This is my opinion. We need more policy that works and less politics because policy is what sets our direction and helps us get things done
Hmm.
and is generally come to by agreement of some sort, not 100% consensus, but generally agreement. So that's a great thing to keep in mind with crisis communications as well, I think, is make sure that everybody understands the role, what the message is, who's presenting the message. It might be a different person depending on what the issue is, right? Cyndee, so if you have different situations, you might want a different person being the lead.
This 2025 had so many lessons in crisis comes. From Doge to government shutdowns to just finances and being shut down. I can remember just another example where a HUD-based community sent a letter to all of its residents saying that it might not have funding from HUD,
Mhm.
and the funding for their subsidized housing might run out in 3 months. And I'd had conversations with other nonprofit organizations about this very topic, and we had decided it's better not to scare people from that sense, but to seek other funding sources to bridge the gap because the funding would come back. And this one organization, they thought they were doing something good by explaining this to their residents, not realizing these are people that were struggling to keep groceries in the house. And
Mhm.
now you've added a whole nother layer of stress and they panicked, you know? So yeah, it, it's a transparency is great and they put the message out, but they didn't have to be so direct to the recipients, and they could have delivered it in a way that was a little less stressful for
Hmm.
their recipients.
So do you think they maybe created a crisis that didn't need to happen by being so blunt?
Yes, yes, and I come back to I do believe in transparency. I do believe in conversations.
Mhm.
I do believe in being open and saying absolutely the funding is not secure right now. We don't know what's happening with the federal government. We are working to find and seek other resources, but if you send people a notice and don't let them know what you're doing,
Mhm.
or how you're trying to mitigate and manage the situation, these people were afraid they were going to get evicted and they were going to be homeless at that
Gosh.
point. And talk about toxic stress to be living through, and that's we certainly don't want that in crisis communication. That's just as important as preserving brand value and preserving the company operations is preserving the peace of mind for your key stakeholders too.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Thank you for sharing that because especially people who are already in dire straits, we don't want to add to their burden or their worry load. So that's excellent advice. But before we wrap up, Cyndee, this is like such a great conversation. I think we could just keep going, but unfortunately, all good things need to end. But before we do that, I have another question. It's kind of a, I guess, a tactical implementation question about a communications plan, crisis communications plan. How often should that be reviewed and updated?
I think you should have your crisis plan updated with your strategic communications plan every year.
Mhm.
And I say that not that new technologies or techniques are going to be introduced every year, right? But the fact that people are reviewing it and understanding it and remembering it. If you've got a crisis plan that's sitting on your back shelf in a binder and no one even knows it exists, then it's not going to do you any good when you need it. And I think that is a real justification for running that as one of your annual training sessions, or maybe you do a monthly training session with your team, and let's just do a mock scenario over, in our meeting of, okay, here's the situation. What's happened? What do we do next? How are we going through this? How are you following the crisis communications plan? And you don't have to literally pull out, hoses and put out fires. You can just talk through the situation. But that real intensity of talking through it and working together helps bring to light the possibilities. And it really builds team when they come through it together and they know that they can rely on each other.
Oh, that's excellent advice. I really support scenario planning and role playing and actually building some of that muscle memory. So excellent advice. Now, I always like to ask my guest, Cyndee, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And then how could they get in touch with you if they'd want to talk more?
I think the biggest takeaway from today is, to not take it for granted that you're going to be able to handle any crisis by yourself. Having a plan, having a chain of command, and engaging all levels of the organization is just going to make your organization so much stronger. And so I hope that people are leaving with a sense of not, oh, I've got one more thing to do to write out this plan, but, oh, wow, I can really engage people more so that we can, be a better organization together. And, if someone wants help with a crisis communications plan or strategy, and I'd love to hear from them, they can reach out to me through my website, which is c2-com.com. So that's the letter C, the number 2, and -com.com. And just reach out through there.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much for helping me ring out season 7 and 2025. Cyndee, it's been great having you.
Ring, 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 ring. It's fantastic being here. Thank you.
You are welcome. And as we wrap up, we have to go rogue for now, and we're going to be taking our winter holiday hiatus for the podcast, but we will be back in early January to kick off season 8. So watch for updates on that. And in the meantime, you can go to our website, roguetulips.com, and check out our podcast page. And you can find this episode with Cyndee and share it with your friends and colleagues, and catch up on our back library while you're relaxing around the fire. If you'd like to know more about our education program, please go to our education page. We are working on our 2026 spring schedule, so sign up for a Notify Me form to find out when registration opens. We also are open for registration for our Lead Forward initiative, and we will be bringing back an updated version of our ethics course in 2026, and that first session will be in February. So watch for updates about that as well. If you'd like to work with Rogue Tulips Consulting and see how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, please check our services page and let's have a conversation. We'd love to work with you. So from Rogue Tulips Consulting, we would like to wish you a very happy holiday season, however you celebrate, and have a wonderful new year. And we will see you in 2026. On behalf of Cyndee and myself, we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.